too sure. All right. Welcome in, everybody. Let's wait for everyone to sneak on in. It's a good turnout tonight. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Hamilton Naturalist Club Bird Study Group for November 2025. A little bit about what we're going to go over before we get to our speaker. We're going to talk a little about what this group is, a little bit of the sightings we've had the last few weeks, a little bit of bird advocacy and news, a bit about the Christmas bird count and upcoming events in general, and then on to our guest speaker, James Lees. So just as a note, we're also streaming this live on YouTube. So you can always go back and watch this presentation again if you want, or any of our past ones that we've broadcast there at youtube.com/@HamiltonNature. We're one of the clubs that do this online. I think we're one of the more active ones on it. But what I like to do nowadays with all our meetings is also highlight another club that's also doing this. So this month I'm going to throw a shout out to Delta Naturalist Society in Delta, BC, who also is posting their meetings to YouTube as well. So if you want another spot to take a look at what they're up to, you can go look that up, deltanaturalist.org, and just go to their link, or take a little screenshot if you're online of that URL. So a little bit about the Hamilton Naturalist Club. We've been protecting nature since 1919. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the study, appreciation, and conservation of wild plants and animals. Our meetings and field events are open to everyone. Membership is not a requirement, but by becoming a member, you'll get our monthly journal, The Wood Duck, shown here, and be supporting our mission to protect nature in the Hamilton study area. And who's new here tonight? Who hasn't been here? So, oh yeah, we got a few new people. Nice. So a little bit about the Hamilton study area for those of you who might not be aware of what I mean by that. It encompasses the entirety of the city of Hamilton, Burlington, towns of Milton, Grimsby, Oakville, and the reserves of Six Nations, the Grand River, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and most of the city of Brantford. And a bunch of little things there, but you can kind of see in that circle what area we consider to be our study area. These lands have been traditional territories of various indigenous peoples, including the Erie peoples, Attawandarak, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. Here's something about the treaty agreements. Within our study area, they include the Between the Lakes Treaty, the Brant Tract, Head of the Lake Purchase, Adjacents Treaty, Treaties 22 and 23. And these are agreements between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who reside just north of Hagersville right now. Additionally, these lands have been covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources of the Great Lakes. We also have a number of nature sanctuaries we operate within. Some are within the circle, some are actually outside the circle, but they represent over 500 acres of land. We also partner with a number of other organizations to protect even more land. The club and its members also conduct numerous bird surveys, I'll get to a little bit of that later, and participate in the bird conservation efforts across the HSA. So you'll notice that we have one new sanctuary this year, the Pine Hill Sanctuary in Dundas Valley. So some of the goals of this group, to keep our minds on the birds beyond what we see and hear in the field, to bring awareness and amplify initiatives, efforts, and projects that are having a positive impact, to allow for broader conversation about bird ecology, threats, efforts, trends, and predictions, and to bring the average person and the expert birder into the same space. So I usually try to do every month a highlight of some bird that's been found since the last meeting that's really exciting. I thought this one was pretty cool. There's actually quite a few interesting sightings this month, but this one I think had the most entries on eBird and therefore the most people to see it, even though it's on private property, and you would, if you want to see this, would have to reach out to Rob Waldhuber about this. But yeah, a rufous hummingbird has been hanging out in Stony Creek for a few days. This is one of the photos I was able to pull off eBird. And this is a bird that would normally be a West Coast species and maybe down along the Louisiana coast as well too sometimes. So, but a bit about other notable sightings. It hasn't actually been that long since our last meeting because of how the calendar works. It's only been like 3 weeks instead of the usual 4 or 5. So even so, there's still a page worth of stuff on here I can throw on here, such as lots of cave swallows showing up in the last few weeks. King Eider was seen in LaSalle Park. I got to see a veery during the fall bird count, the Allen Wormington fall bird count. Swainson's thrush, there was a couple of those. Red phalarope was continuing in Valley Inn. Northern gannet, there was actually a couple different sightings of northern gannet. I thought that was pretty exciting. In Bronte Harbor and Lakeland are a couple examples. Barrow's goldeneye, I'll get to another variation on that later, but there was Barrow's goldeneye out at Grays Road. Razorbill was kind of a one hour wonder maybe. I think it was found kind of late in the day and wasn't there the next day down at 50 Point. Red pole, there's been a few around. They're not necessarily a rare bird, but this year's winter finch report says we're going to be seeing some, and we definitely have been hearing from some. Rufous hummingbird, of course, as I mentioned earlier. Pectoral sandpiper. Parasitic and palmerine yagers have been reported at Van Wagner's Beach. As well as black-legged kittiwake. There were several reports of yellow-bellied sapsucker, not flycatcher, sapsucker. And I was mentioning earlier there was another Barrow's goldeneye, but this one was a hybrid, common X Barrows. Also, greater white-fronted goose at LaSalle Park, yellow-rumped warbler. That's one I saw at McMaster University during the fall bird count. Evening grosbeak, there was someone at Valens, the village, the hamlet, not the CA. Someone around there reported having their feeder, having I think 3 evening grosbeak hanging out at it. And just in the tip of the HSA up in Guelph, there was a Tennessee warbler reported at a private yard. So there's a few things that's been going on since October 27th. So a little bit about bird advocacy. These are updates we like to provide every month about some of the things going on related to bird advocacy in the HSA. So Hamilton is still awaiting meaningful mandatory bird-friendly guidelines in new construction. I think that meant on April 30th, not and, but this is a copy-paste job I did. On April 30th, General Issues Committee voted 11-3 to refer the green building standards back to review. May 7th, Council voted in favor of a decision 12-3. Mayor Horvath was absent for both votes. The General Issues Committee was supposed to revisit the GBS issue early in the fourth quarter of 2025. As of the most recent meeting on the 12th, though, nothing has happened, so contact your councilor with a quick email and ask why the green building standards and bird-friendly guidelines have been delayed. Hamilton is years behind other Ontario municipalities. Birdsong Hamilton and Flap Canada have updated by the Conservation Authority about the windows on their heritage building at the Ancaster headquarters. For those that aren't aware, the Ancaster headquarters are those that are along, I think it's Sulphur Spring Road or somewhere. It's deep in the valley there, and it's considered a heritage building. Many of the windows have been assessed as high risk and between high risk to lethal for Flap's Bird Safe program. The windows were to be repaired or replaced this fall and treated with bird-friendly markers. Unfortunately, the project has been delayed until spring. We'll continue to update you on that. Now, I know there was someone who was going to talk tonight, and I don't know if they're here, about the fireworks. Is she here tonight? I don't see. Nope. Okay. So I'm going to skip that one. The Ontario government is proposing the amalgamation of conservation authorities. So if you're unaware of this, this is a website you may want to go check out because we only have so much time to comment on this. And this is the proposed map of new conservation authorities. Specifically, they'd be merging like the Hamilton, Niagara, and Halton together into basically a Western Lake Ontario Conservation Authority. And all the ones that are to the west would become this kind of Lake Erie Conservation Authority. And to the north would be this kind of Huron/Superior one. So yeah, definitely the club is going to be commenting on this, but I think it's more, just as important, if not more, that individuals write letters about this during this comment period. So we strongly suggest you all write letters in response. The club will be sending one as an organization, as I said, but it is, I think, very important to make sure we have this communicated, that this is going on. Trumpeter swans. So the Ontario Trumpeter Swan Conservation Organization, I can't remember their name fully right now, I didn't write it down fully here. Oh, Trumpeter Swan Conservation Ontario, that's what it's called. They're trying to do a fundraiser right now for the winter. They would like to tag 200 birds this winter, and their tag inventory is running rather low, so they're soliciting donations on the web address here. If you were just look up on Google or something like that, Canada Helps and Trumpeter Swan, this will come up, Trumpeter Swan Ontario at least, and you can make a donation. I think just about any amount helps, because I can't imagine individual tags are terribly expensive, but at 200 of them is probably a little more. So even if you can pay for just a tag or two, I think that would be helpful to them. All right, so Christmas bird count time is coming up, and I'm going to talk about more of this in December, I think. But within the HSA, the club operates 3 of the, I think there's about 7 counts that technically touch the HSA. We operate 3 of them, the Hamilton one, the Flamborough one, and the Peachtree one, which is considered to be kind of East Hamilton, West Niagara area. We could always use assistance beyond just counting. If somebody, for example, is really enthusiastic about coordinating a feeder count, for example, we have this tendency to be very low in feeder counters for the Hamilton count, even though we'll get like nearly 100 or more people out in the field. We'll get like 2 or 3 people reporting their feeders. So it'd be great to, I always feel like in the past years that it'd be nice if we had a separate coordinator who could just make sure that there's a bunch of people counting feeders that day, and then we'll just merge the data together kind of thing, as long as they're within the circle and all those boxes are checked for the scientific stuff. So that would be useful if we could get someone to help with that, or just promoting the count and letting people know this is happening. We could always use more awareness out there. And let's see, and connecting people between each other. So one of the things about the count is that some of the coordination work behind the scenes is just connecting people together, because there are people who are interested in just going out and wouldn't mind some help with them. And then there's other people who would love to just join someone who's done this before and follow them around and count birds with them. And we'd love to have help connecting those 2 kinds of people. So there's a lot of options within there. And I didn't put the dates on here, I should have, but everything's on our website. So if you go to hamiltonnature.org and look for the bird count section, you'll notice that the Hamilton Christmas bird count is on the 26th, so that's Boxing Day of December. The Flamborough count is on the 30th, so basically 4 days later. The Peachtree, I haven't heard back from Chris when he's going to schedule that, but it's generally early January, so it'll probably be 2nd, 3rd, 4th, somewhere around there. But TBD, we'll know for sure very soon, but you can sign up for the Hamilton and the Flamborough one right now from the website. We're actually piloting a new program from the Audubon where they are managing our sign-ups. So there'll be a simple intake form that you fill in, and it'll be the same web address every year. You can always go to that form and just fill it in. And so they're trying to help standardize a lot of Christmas bird counts for intake. And so we're going to be part of the pilot project for that. And that should make it a little easier to coordinate. Also going on, the WELLO, so that's the west end of Lake Ontario, KBA, Key Biodiversity Areas Survey. It takes place on the 2nd Saturday each month. So we've already had the November one, but December, January, February, March, April, still to come. There are 17 areas that one could be counting for this, anywhere from west to Dixie Road, down to Niagara Lake. There will be zones for those. So if you want to help participate in that, contact Chris at that email address right there. This has been ongoing for I think 10 years now, 9 or 10 years, something like that. So this is an ongoing survey. These used to be known as IBAs, important bird areas, but those are slowly being converted over, if you're not aware, to key biodiversity areas, which is less bird focused and more just biodiversity in general focused. So that's in case you're wondering what happened to IBA, that's what's happened. Okay, so I've gotten through this a lot quicker than I had thought. That's good. So next, HNC general meeting. So this is for those new here, this is the bird study group meeting. There are 2 meetings a month. One is the general meeting, and that could be any topic that we cover as naturalists. Generally not birds, because we have the bird study group, which does birds. So the next one for the general meeting is Drawn from Nature, Women Artists and Botanical Works with Natalie Scola. So this presentation will highlight historical and contemporary examples of women whose artistic practices merge art and science. From the early botanical illustrators to contemporary artists addressing themes of ecology, preservation, and identity, Drawn from Nature reveals how women's perspective have shaped our understanding of plants, nature, and the environment we inhabit. So that is Monday, December 8th at 7:30 p.m. here. And before we get to our speaker tonight, just a little bit about next month's Nuts and Bolts with Catherine Menashot. We're going to be talking about the fascinating world of passerine molts, the act of growing new feathers. So she's going to be using photos taken from Sheila Dunduli, one of our sanctuaries, breeding bird banding station. We will journey through different types of molts, what they look like, and most importantly, why they occur. And that's going to be December 15th here. So tonight's speaker, Falkland Islands, a family affair with James Lees. In early 2024, James Lees accompanied his father and 2 friends on a trip of a lifetime to the Falkland Islands. They began this fascinating trip from the Royal Air Force Base in Breeze Norton, Oxfordshire, and traveled 12,900 kilometers on an RAF refueling jet to the remote South Atlantic Ocean archipelago. Famous for its rugged landscapes and penguins, James will take you through the wildlife and history of these remarkable islands in the peak of the summer breeding season. So I'd love to invite James up here.
Hemisphere summer.
Sorry?
So that would be the southern hemisphere summer.
Yes. So I'd like to invite James up, and we will take a moment here to switch PowerPoint slides. Give me a second. All right. Slideshow. All right. You can just use the arrow keys back and forth, if that's good.
Perfect. Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you for inviting me along tonight to talk about this trip. This is the first time I've delivered this talk on this particular trip, so you're my test group, so I hope it goes well. You'll have to give me some feedback on it. Sorry, is a question already? No. Oops. Hang on, I skipped one. Okay, so just a little bit of introduction about myself if you don't know me. Started my sort of career with birds from quite a young age, about 8 or 9 years old. My dad has always had me out in the nature, so from an early age I got quite heavily into bird banding and started doing that, birding, and then studied animal science before taking my first sort of roles in bird observatory life, where I was doing lots of monitoring of migration and bird banding at about 5 different bird observatories around the UK. That's the top right picture where I look like a baby in the early stages. Anyone know what that bird is? No. It's a European bird, so it's a golden oriole, that one. So that's a good bird to catch. So after doing bird observatory work, I moved on to work at the Wildfowl Wetlands Trust, Slimbridge Centre in the UK, where I work predominantly with wildfowl and shorebirds, but very much closely tied with the Buick swan, which is a European version of your tundra swans. So I did a lot of research with them. And then my wife and family, we emigrated here about 10 years ago. Now work for Hamilton Conservation, and I'm also a tour guide for Eagle Eye Tours, which you can see in the top left. Whereas in the center picture there, when I worked in Europe, I guided for a European company, Nature Trek. So I've done lots of guiding around the world. When I was asked to do a talk, I could have done it on, I don't know, 30 or 40 different places that I've tour guided around the world. And although I've been quite a few places since the Falklands, I just felt like doing the Falklands because it was such a good trip. And it was more than just the sort of birds, I suppose. So just a brief sort of history on the Falkland Islands. If you're not aware of them, the Falkland Islands are almost in Antarctica. They're sort of just off the very southern tip of South America. And originally, Britain first established a settlement there in 1765. They kind of left. The Spanish and the Argentinians moved in, took over. Then the British people were back again, and then the Argentinians decided that actually they wanted it, and then a sort of full-out war took place in 1982. Which eventually the UK sort of won that battle, and since then it's been very much maintained by British people living down there. So my journey, why did I decide to go there? I sort of hope one day that I will go there anyway. At the moment, I don't have time to guide in Antarctic because most of the trips are 2 or 3 weeks, and then you kind of have to stay on for the next trip. So it's 6 weeks or longer. With a full-time job, it's kind of difficult. So I'm hoping that later in life I can retire and then go sort of full-time guiding and do more trips down there. But at this stage, it was sort of somewhere that I didn't think I'd get to. And then my dad talked one day about going to the Falklands. And I said to him I'd like to go, which I normally say to any of the trips that my dad does because he's a big traveller. Hasn't always worked out. I've been with him a few times. So one day he did ring me up. He rang me up in, I think, February 2024 and said that they were just putting the final stages of a trip to the Falklands together. And it sounded like I wasn't going at all at that point. And then right at the end of the phone call, he said, "Are you coming then or what?" And I said, "What, this trip? Like in 2 weeks' time, pretty much?" He's like, "Yeah." So I jumped at the chance to do that. It's quite a difficult place to get to, the Falkland Islands. There's only really 2 ways to get there from here in Ontario. For you guys, probably the easiest way, you'd fly down.
Buenos Aires, you go to Buenos Aires, and then I think then there's another plane that goes to somewhere else in Argentina, and then, like, I believe to the Falklands. I believe that's the case.
Pretty much what he said, yeah. Various flights down through South America, but again, it's like 3 or 4 flights to get down there, and you'd have to fly from Chile. You can't fly from Argentina. Argentinians aren't allowed to the Falklands, so there's only one scheduled flight per week to the Falkland Islands from the mainland, and that's from Chile. Now, I decided not to go that route. I could have met my family down there, but they were going a far more sort of interesting journey. So my first part of the journey was to go to Ireland. I flew from Toronto to Ireland. I've just put there the mileage, which is just over 5,500 miles the first flight. So I just wanted to draw to your attention my awful carbon footprint for this trip. And then the next flight was from there, was a fairly quick connection, and then across to the UK to Bristol. So my dad doesn't live too far from there, so he came and picked me up, spent the night with him. Okay, so this is the team that we went with. The handsome guy there on the right is my godfather, John. John's actually quite into history. He's got his own history museum. And then to the second from the right, that's my father, Rod. guy to the next to the left with the beard, that's Kevin. So those two guys worked with my dad my whole life. So obviously one's my godfather. The other guy with my dad, the three of them was sort of family. Like they grew up in their working environment right through my dad's working career. So I knew these guys really well. And then obviously the guy on the far side is myself there. So that was the team. And Kevin there next to me, he's very much into military history, and his dad actually went down to the Falklands and was doing testing on one of the ships, which replaced some of the ones which were sunk in the war. So that was kind of, we all had different reasons to go. There was a mixture of history. Everyone there was interested in nature. I obviously wanted to go for the opportunity to see some really cool birds. My dad's, one of his drives, he's quite passionate about beer. And he's been to the most northerly brewery in the world, which is in Arctic Norway, and he wanted to go to the most southerly brewery in the world, which is in the Falkland Islands. So we all had different reasons for going, but that's where we went. So anyway, we met at this RAF base, and you all know what flying's like. It's not easy going to an airport at the best of times, that 2 or 3 hours before a flight, or the security. Flying with the Royal Air Force is incredibly upscaled version of that. So the RAF fly down to the Falkland Islands. It's basically they're flying troops down. They're swapping out soldiers from the island, but it's the only way that any British people that live on the island can get back to the UK. So they offer a small amount of seats on the aeroplane. So we're going into this active base. There's other soldiers waiting for flights to Afghanistan, in full combat uniform, and I'm stood there in my bright red jacket and my binoculars. So it's quite a surreal environment to be in. So just a little bit about the airbase, because even that part of the trip was exciting, going to this military airbase surrounded by soldiers. Yeah, it's the largest Air Force base in the UK. It's like a mini city. There's like 6,000 people work there, and it provides global mobility and support of UK operations and exercises. So if a war breaks out, there's refueling jets going out of there, all the troops are staged from there. But also if there's a massive typhoon somewhere and the UK would send an aid aircraft out, it would go from there. So it's a huge air base, and it was just a really cool experience to get the opportunity to fly from there. So obviously I had to check in with a passport and everything, but you get a full-on tag there to prove who you are at all times, because if you're not wearing sort of combat clothing, they look at you suspiciously anyway, so you've got to make sure you wear your tag all the time. Quickly checked up on the RAF news while I was in there, and then it was time to board the next flight. So you're not supposed to take pictures on military air bases. We were told specifically not to photograph the aeroplane. So obviously I didn't take this picture. This is one that I pulled from somewhere. So this is an air tanker. So this plane is able to refuel other aircraft en route. That's its main purpose, but it can also carry a proportion of troops too. So the first part of our flight there was a 6,552 kilometer flight down to the Ascension Islands, which is about a 10-hour flight, as I remember. Flying on a military jet sounded really cool until I realized there's no entertainment system at all. It's literally an empty shell with the most basic seats you could ever imagine in it. So it sounded like it was going to be such a fun adventure, and I strapped into this Royal Air Force jet and then realized that I now had 10 hours to just sit in this seat and do absolutely nothing at all. But arriving here, you can see this is the Ascension Island, so this is kind of about halfway. Basically it's a volcano with a runway on it. And it's got some really cool birds there. And I was actually talking to the cabin crew on the aircraft, and they get off and they get to spend a couple of days there before the return flight comes back. And the lazies were telling me about all these really cool seabirds that they walk over the nests of all these great birds. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so good. We got about 2 hours. I think is it about 2 hours there? Let's see what my list says. No, it was only 1 hour and 5 minutes. So if you're not familiar with eBird, that's just a little screen grab from my eBird list there. But you can see that the eBird hotspot is called RAF Ascension Cage. So I quickly realized that there would be no sort of wandering off birding for an hour while the plane refueled. It was literally a few benches with a cage around it. So you weren't allowed to leave. We were briefed before we left the aircraft that we weren't to photograph the plane. We weren't allowed to photograph anything else. So this is actually a US Air Force base. So the Americans can hop across quite well and use this if they then want to go into Africa. So it was very sort of all hush-hush. I did ask, I said, well, can I use my binoculars to one guy? And he sort of gave me a funny look. He's like, yeah, I guess. And so I started birding from basically staring out from this cage. Everyone else was using the washrooms or grabbing a drink. And it was a pretty cool place, actually. This volcano had a huge breeding colony of terns. So there's, I recorded about 4,000 sooty terns flying around the airport. Atlantic white tern, which was a pretty decent bird to pick up there, as well as the Ascension frigate bird, which is a sort of endemic to that island there. So they were pretty good, but you could tell that place was amazing, and I'm stuck in this cage, not being able to get out, so it was a little disappointing. I have no photographs of any of those birds, because I probably wouldn't be here now if I had got my camera out. Okay, so the next part of the flight from the Ascension Isles, straight down to the Falkland Islands then. And if any of you know about the Falklands War, so when Argentina invaded, if you look there, Argentina is right next to the Falklands. So when they invaded the Falkland Islands, it took the UK about 2.5, 3 weeks to respond, to actually get down and do anything about it, because they had to bring down most of their aircraft on ships, and it took the ships 2 or 3 weeks to get there. So we did the same route that a lot of the aircraft did, and at the time it was the longest bombing run of any aircraft in the world. The Vulcan bombers flew down to blow up the airstrip on the Falklands that the Argentinians were using, and the plane that dropped the bomb, I think it took about 36 aircraft to refuel it to get it there and back at the time. So we did that route, and I was being told the history of this going down. So it was kind of cool to sort of, be doing the same route as these guys did. That is a real picture of the plane when we landed. My dad turned around and went like that to take a picture, and about 6 soldiers immediately jumped on him and took him out. And during this kerfuffle, I took that picture of the jet. So his camera everything got deleted on his camera, and he got taken away for a little bit. But he likes to tell everyone that he sort of took one for the team to allow me to get a good shot there. So that's us once we got outside of the airport there. So for my dad, it's a 12,600 mile journey. For me at that point, it was about 18,000 kilometers journey for me at that point. So this is Stanley. This is the capital, or the only town on the Falklands. Really, actually pretty town. You can see a big cruise ship in the left-hand corner there. So it's a very common area that cruise ships would come into. They would dock there, tourists would come off and choose to do whether they went looking at penguins for the day, looking around the town, or going off to look at some of the history. And then that boat might go on to South Georgia, and then the Antarctic Peninsula, and then back round to Chile. So every day there was a sort of cruise ship would come into there. So that was it. The first couple of days was literally just traveling to get there. And then, so just a little bit about the Falkland Islands as a whole. So it's an archipelago made up of the two main islands there, which are fairly substantial. The population is just over 3,500 people, and most of their employment is by either fishing, which is especially squid exports, tourism, and sheep farming. That's what most people would make their living out of, living down there. So I said it's two main islands, but there's also 778 smaller islands. So the next morning we were planned to make one more flight, which is from the right-hand side there is the main city on the Falklands, at Stanley. And then it's a very short 164-kilometer flight to Saunders Island. So the reason we chose to do that, on the big island there are some penguins. There's one of the biggest breeding colonies of king penguins anywhere in the Falkland Islands there, but it's very difficult to get to. It's up in that top right-hand corner, and it would have been kind of an entire day just to get there to see one species. So we did a lot of research, and we decided to go out to a sort of remote island called Saunders Island, where we could see perhaps not like huge numbers of birds, but a good variety. So that's what we decided to do. So woke up the next day, and it was looking pretty good actually. From the hotel I could see right across the bay to the other side. We sat down, had a lovely breakfast. It was all very casual, like the airport was 10 minutes up the road. And I was pretty excited that within the next couple of hours I was going to be seeing all these really cool birds. And then we pulled up at the airport, and, well, I should say that short 10-minute drive, as we began it gradually got more and more foggy. And to the point that when we got to the airport, you couldn't see, I mean, you can see there, like that building in the background is probably 100 meters away, and beyond that you couldn't see. Now I'm kind of thinking, I've just flown like 18,000 miles to get here. You know, we've flown in all sorts of conditions. I guess I was kind of naive, thinking, you know, oh, it's all good. Like they're going to take off fine. So we get to the little check-in area there, and the lady says, well, there's a couple of people ahead of me checking in, and it seemed to be going through. I was like, okay, they don't seem to be telling them anything different. So they're still putting tags on the bags, taking the bags. So we got there, all good. They were, again, taking our bags, and I thought, oh, you know, maybe I was panicking a bit. And then she just sort of casually said, well, the flight's obviously not going because of the fog, but you're welcome to go back to your hotel, and we'll give you a ring if anything changes. She said, the other two that are on your flight, they're going back home for breakfast. I was like, going back home for breakfast? Like, they don't have to wait here? And she's like, no, we'll just give them a ring if it's going to go. And I said, oh, okay. I was like, well, I guess we'll just like kind of walk around here birding for a bit then. And she's like, yeah, okay. She said, but if the sun comes out, you better come back. I was like, okay. And I said, so what are the chances of it clearing? And she said, well, it didn't clear last week. And I said, what day last week? And she said, no, like the whole week. So at that point, I was pretty disappointed, because we weren't there for a huge amount of time. And then I was like, okay, so we're going to lose some major time here. So anyway, we walked off down the road and immediately started hearing some birds. So this is actually taken in the fog, but quite close. So this is one of the sort of local birds. This is called grass wren. Sort of almost like a sedge wren, here slightly different. So we, you know, at least we got an opportunity to start seeing some of the local birds. walked down a bit further and got to the coastline, and there's a couple of shorebirds. So we got 3-banded plover on the left and rufous-chested dotterel on the right. Both of these birds actually are fairly colourful, but I managed to just photograph the females there in the fog. But still, these were all sort of new birds that I hadn't seen before. And then this one here, if you're familiar with oyster catchers, if you go out to British Columbia, you might have seen black oyster catcher. Well, this is a bit like a black oyster catcher, but not so black. So this is blackish oyster catcher. That's its real name, by the way, and I'm not messing about there. So that's one or two different species of oyster catcher which are found on the Falklands. Then the next one, these were everywhere down on the beach. So this is kelp goose. I should say that most of these species I'm showing you, if you've been to sort of mainland Argentina or Chile, you might have seen these there. Like, these aren't necessarily only to be found in the Falklands, but also on the tip of the peninsulas there too. But kelp geese are actually really beautiful geese. This is a pair. So the female's on the left there with the dark plumage with these lovely white bands, and then the male's all white on the right-hand side. And they're very much tied to the coastlines, like they're feeding on seaweed and kelp and other things on the shoreline there. So they're absolutely beautiful, very, very tame, can just walk right up to them, so that's pretty neat. So we were watching these geese. I don't know if my dad got bored that I was taking pictures, or he kind of wanders anyway. But I sort of looked around and he wasn't there. And then I could hear my name being yelled. And I sort of looked over to my left, and my dad's sort of doing this and screaming at me. And there's a Land Rover parked behind him. And he's like waving. And I was like, oh, he's got a good bird. He's got something cool or something. So I sort of ran back. And it was the lady from that checked us in that had driven down in a Land Rover, and the sun had just poked through enough that you can see on the right-hand side there, the bank of fog just sort of rolled away from us, and suddenly like it opened up. And I jumped in this Land Rover, and this lady said, she's like, come on, the flight's going now. And I was like, what now? And she's like, yeah, like they're on it. And so I thought these other guys had gone back for breakfast. She's like, yeah, well, they're on the plane. I was like, okay. So it's obviously like it's a different world there. They're just very casual, do things very differently. This lady whizzes us up, straight out onto the apron there, walks us out with some steps. We jump on the plane. I actually got a sweet deal there. I got to sit in the front with the pilot. Got to put the headset on, could hear everything. The second the door shut, he starts it up, and off we're going. If there's actually time, I've got a little video of that which I can show you at the end there. So just the middle picture shows you those little codes there. So that's each of the islands. So every island has a 3-digit code that they use for the baggage. So you can't see it, but behind to the left of the lady, there's about 60 different codes to make sure that your bag gets there. So this aircraft, this is their own airline, the Falkland Islands transportation. Basically, it's like their public transport. It's like a bus system. So when we were trying to book these flights, we tried to figure out what time they were leaving, but it doesn't work like that. They go when you book them. It's kind of like a taxi. So anyway, everything suddenly worked out. Maybe we were an hour and a half, 2 hours late, but we went from not thinking we were going to just suddenly like mad rush, we're going. So that's on the aircraft there, and this is the biggest aircraft. That's it. So turns out that the couple which were having breakfast with us are on our flight, but not until it returns. So it drops us off, comes back, picks them up, goes to a different island. So that's the whole team there on the little plane. And as I say, we're up and off, and they only fly about 1,200, 1,800 feet. So you just get phenomenal views the entire way. So it's about an hour flight over all the islands. I'm chatting away with the pilot through the headset all the way. It was a really, really neat flight. So this is coming into Saunders Island, and that's the airstrip just straight down there. You can just see that long brown strip. That's it. That's the airport. He actually did the coolest arrival. Kind of went to the far end of the land there, and then just took a hard right, like he was in like a Spitfire in the war, and we banked hard right, and before he straightened the wings like that, bang, like we hit the ground. So it was really, really cool. Okay, so I obviously color coordinated my clothing in advance because I knew that this airline looked cool. I didn't actually. That jacket I bought in the UK the night before we left because my other jacket ripped en route. But the reason I'm stood in front of that plane is that does have good memories through me. So I worked at a bird observatory in the northern islands of the UK. I worked in the Orkneys, and there was only 25 people that lived on that island. I worked there for a year. And one of these aircraft, this is an Islander, would come in every day. It was a scheduled flight, British Airways logo on it. So that's the reason I kind of look so happy there. It just brings back some really cool memories of the little plane coming in out of that island. And then we went across here and we collected our bags from the international arrivals. And I got to tell you, it's a lot smoother than Toronto Pearson. It was quick. You went in, there were your bags. Why can't Pearson be like that? And then we jumped in a Land Rover. So probably what I didn't say, so the Falklands is basically like Little Britain, but 12,000 kilometers away. So everything's British. Everyone sounds British. British vehicles, British license plates, British money, British police, everything. So Land Rover, British, the sort of car of choice. So next thing we did once we got there is we went to the local shop to get some food before we got into the nature stuff. So this is inside the shop. If you're familiar, I don't know how many of you grew up in the UK or have been to the UK, but all of that stuff there, that's British food, all of that. Like all of that is being flown or shipped those sort of 12,000 kilometers down there. Most of it is stuff that's not going to go off. So there's some pies in a tin. I don't know if you're familiar with those, Fray Benton pies. It's like a flat tin, and then you cut the lid off, but you don't take the lid off, and you bake it in the oven, and then the pastry rises, and the lid pops off. Actually really good. But they could probably last about 300 years before they go off. So we went in there and we sort of chose some food for the next few days, and then chucked our gear in, and then sort of got straight out then. So about an hour and a half drive in a Land Rover, really bumpy drive across the island, and then I should have said there's only 2 people live on that island. So the guy dropped us out here. He said, I'll pick you up in like 5 hours, and then he drove off. So you can probably just about see, but if you look at the beach area, it's like covered in little white specks, and that's all penguins. So that was one of the reasons I really wanted to go, is to try and see penguins. And this is sort of the first ones we encountered, really. So these are western rockhopper penguins, and they're named rockhopper penguins because they literally hop up the rock, and they do so with both feet together. If you're familiar with like a fox sparrow, how it scratches backwards with its feet, That's the sort of same way these guys like hop up the cliffs. And this is like 500-600 feet up, steep, like vertical in places. And if you look at their tiny little sort of flipper stroke wings, they can sort of balance themselves a bit, but the fact that they're able to sort of hop all the way up to the top of the cliff is pretty remarkable. And they have very, very strong feet and sharp claws. But yeah, it's just fascinating. So that's the sort of first of the penguins that we really encountered. Now, we bumped into David Attenborough while we were up there, which was like miraculous. No, it's my dad. Often mistaken at a distance. But my dad there is obviously pretty happy. I'd say ecstatic. I mean, he's talked about seeing penguins for a long time. And I think we all thought that morning with the fog that it wasn't going to sort of happen. There's also a lot of things that can go wrong with trying to get to the Falklands. If it's actually foggy when you arrive, they turn the plane round, and it has to go to Chile to refuel, then back to the Ascensions, and then because there's only one flight a week, you're kind of done. So we were lucky to get in, and then kind of lucky the weather worked out. So I think his sort of, is that a smile? I don't know. His sort of, I think that's sort of ecstatic happiness that we made it, and he's sort of surrounded by these penguins. So the southern rockhopper is the smallest of the penguin species that occur on the islands, and there's 5 different species which occur there. And they've got these really quite funky hairdos, as you can see there. Now, like all penguins, or I mean any kind of seabird or anything that nests in a colony, there's always quite a lot of friction. They all have their little place in there, and if one strays too close, they get snapped at and shouted at. So penguins are actually really cool birds to be around. There's so much going on. They don't just come ashore and sort of sleep. There's so much activity. So it's really neat to be stood right amongst them and watching all this happen. And when I say stood amongst them, they're sort of as close as this. There's absolutely no fear at all. They're only a few feet away from you. Actually made it quite difficult with the camera. You had to always back up with the camera most of the time. So these penguins breed quite early, and their young were actually fully grown, and we didn't see any young rockhoppers, so they'd already gone. So we were there in March, and that's coming into their autumn, or fall. So by April time, that's the start of their fall. So those penguins had already gone, and we just had the adults left. And they don't winter on the island. They'll actually go a long way. They'll go several hundred kilometers, and they'll winter up near Patagonia off the coast there. So they're gone for the whole of the winter time. And then really this was one of the big drives for me. It's like I've been lucky to see albatross in a few places around the world, but if you've ever seen an albatross, I think you're hooked for life. Like they are just, that's actually a really bad thing to say, because they do get hooked a lot on long line trawlers, and lots of them die. So that wasn't an intentional bad joke, if you see what I mean. But if you've ever seen an albatross, you would definitely want to see more. Like they are absolutely incredible birds in so many different ways. They're beautiful, they're massive, they're just so elegant in flight. So to have an opportunity to actually see them nesting and be up close to them was definitely one of the huge drives for me to get there to see that. So that's a little selfie I took with the phone there of me looking pretty happy about it. So here we can see absolutely gorgeous adult on the right there. You can see why the species gets the name black-browed albatross, has that little black brow, nice bit of sort of eyeliner across there. And then that sort of soft peachy colored bill. So the Falklands is the most important site globally for black-browed albatross. It actually has about 70% of the world's breeding population there. So it's very, very important for them. and that's about 500,000 pairs. So this is the reason that we made the trip out to this island, is that they don't nest on any of the big islands. If there's cats or dogs or rats, they don't nest there. So you have to go to these remote islands to see them. And I really did want to kind of see them like this. So you can see the youngsters sat on the nest there. We're there late in the year, so that's not far off from fledging, that one there. So they actually arrive in the Falklands in September, so that's their spring. And then they would incubate, and it's a big bird, and they take a long time to develop. So it's about an 8-month process to go from laying the egg to leaving the nest. And you can see this individual here is probably a couple of weeks away from fledging. So the nest mound, they reuse every year. They might add to it or touch it up if it's had any wear during the winter time. But this is a solid pillar, about 50 centimeters tall, which is made out of mud and guano, which they sit on and lay a single egg there. Now, I do have a video, hopefully I can play at the end, but all of the babies are constantly begging the entire time, this little begging sound. And even when the parent comes in and feeds the chick, they just keep begging, and they keep putting their bill up and hitting the parent's beak all the time, asking for more food. And I kept thinking, like, you've already fed it, like, don't they get it? Like, why are they still going? But they would then regurgitate more. And so I guess they would do it in several, they wouldn't just come in, deliver one lot of food. They would come in, deliver a bit, wait, and then the chicks would ask for more, and then they would deliver more. So you can see here, this is how the young are fed. They're basically regurgitated at pretty much a liquid diet of their favorite food source, which is lobster, krill, and squid. And the albatrosses will actually travel huge distances to find the food. They'll travel anything up to like 350 kilometers per feeding round. So they'll leave the nest and potentially fly, 200 miles or over 300 kilometers to find food to bring back to the chick. Now that seems like a lot, but albatross are sort of built for flight. But you can see there, that is delivering the food, so it's just getting this really high protein, high energy seafood, syrupy blend, basically. So this is just a kind of look at the albatross there. So if you look at that bird on the left-hand side, so the wingspan of a black-browed albatross is 8 feet. So I like to say I'm 6 foot. My wife likes to tell everyone that I'm 5'9", but we'll say 6 foot. So if you imagine, that means a black-browed albatross wingspan is like this tall, or this high. So these are huge birds. So when you're that close and they're flying around you, like they get the updraft off the cliff and they just come up and go over your head, it's just absolutely phenomenal. But I just wanted to explain a little bit about how albatross fly, because you're sort of land-based here in Ontario, you're not near the ocean. I don't know how much you guys have watched ocean birds, but because I obviously grew up in the UK, it's very fortunate to be able to watch seabirds, and most seabirds shear, use the wind to help them fly. So it's a little diagram here just to sort of explain that. And I actually wrote some notes so that I get this right. So I'm going to read the notes just to try and explain it. But basically, what sort of shearwaters, fulmars, albatrosses or petrels, this is what they do, is they use a dynamic soaring to utilize wind by flying in a zigzag pattern that allows them to gain energy from the difference in wind speed between the surface of the water and higher altitudes. So that basically means that the wind speed just above the waves is a lot slower than it is, say, 15, 20 foot above the waves. Now that's quite important. So that means that they climb into the faster wind higher up to gain speed and altitude, and then glide down into the slower air near the water, using gravity to accelerate before launching back up to repeat the cycle. So they'll do this, and as they gain height, they'll gain up to about 60 foot in height, and then they'll bank over and then drop, and then they'll be dropping at like 40 miles an hour. Because they've got that speed, they then hit, and with the shape of the wings, the wind will pass faster over the top of the wing, slower underneath, it will give them lift, and then back up they go. Now they do this in a zigzag fashion, which means if they're traveling 100 miles, they're probably going to travel 150 miles, because they're kind of zigzagging and going back on themselves to get forward. So when you're actually watching seabirds with a telescope, particularly on the horizon, you'll see them come along and go up and down. And if you keep following with the telescope, you'll lose it, because what happens is they go up and then they kind of come down, but they go back on themselves before they come up. So when you're watching them in the scope, you have to sort of bear that in mind all the time. But what this allows them to do is, if they're doing these feeding forays of 300 kilometers, basically means that they're just utilizing the energy like the winds are producing off of the ocean, and they don't have to flap. So at no point are they flapping. Maybe they flap to get off the cliff, let go, and that's it. They're just completely utilizing the wind. So even flying into the wind. So they absolutely are incredible birds. Okay, and this is a slightly younger black-browed albatross. This one sort of reminds me of like if an albatross was trying to be a cotton candy. You know, they've got that sort of lovely look to them. So this youngster has probably got another like 3 or 4 weeks to go before he or she leaves the nest. And they do that very quickly. Once they've got their flight feathers, they jump off, and they'll actually head off to the coastline of Brazil, where they'll spend their first winter. They won't return to land for about 7 to 10 years before they start to breed themselves. So because they're such a big bird, they take a long time to reach sexual maturity, and that doesn't tend to be until they're about 7 or 8. In which time it's probably going to fly tens of billions of miles around the Earth on the ocean. And these birds would generally live up to about 50 years. So although it's going to take them 8 to 10 years before they come back to breed, they could still have 40 years worth of time to breed after that. And then this is just, I just wanted to show you, like that's an 8-foot wingspan. But when they come in to land at the nest, they're coming in like right like here in front of you, and they're just hanging on the wind. So you can see there, it's using the tail as a rudder, twist the tail for direction, and then it's bending the wings in, just as aeroplanes do with flaps on the wing. And so it's trying to slow itself right down. So it's completely changing its entire body position to go from basically this rocket that goes across the ocean at 40, 50 miles an hour, to suddenly now it needs to be very agile and land. So it completely changes its whole posture to do that. So it's really, really neat to see them coming in like that. You see the same with the legs. The legs are normally tucked in, but they're actually using them as drag, putting them out and trying to slow themselves down. Okay, so into the penguins. There is a huge colony of king penguins in the Falkland Islands, but on the Saunders, this is a much smaller group. There's about 50 birds. But again, was happy with that. I'd happy if I just saw one. Absolutely stunning birds, just making these sounds all the time, displaying that every now and again they would just put their heads back like that and just start singing away to each other. Lots of bickering, fighting, lots of preening going on at all times. So king penguins' breeding cycle is actually one of the longest and sort of most complicated of all the penguin species. And that's because, again, they're big birds, they take a long time to breed. So A pair would have a youngster. It would take them 14 months from egg to fledge, which means that they can't raise a chick every year. So they could only at best raise 2 chicks within a 3-year period. You can see here, one of the days we were there, it was really, really cold and windy, and the chicks would just shove their head under their parent and trying to keep as warm as they possibly could. So the king penguins incubate for about 55 days. And you can see in this picture here, there's at least 3 different birds incubating there. So the easiest one to see is the one facing us there. You can actually see the egg. Can you just see it? The white egg on top of its feet. So what they do is they lay the egg on top of their feet. The feet are quite tough and warm, and then they put that big layer of feathers over the top and try and keep it warm. And what they do is, the one on the right there is giving you a good demonstration. When it's cold like that, they'll lift the feet up in the air to try and keep that egg off the ground and keep it even warmer. What's also neat about them is both the male and female will incubate, and when it's time to switch over, they do this amazing switch of the egg. They obviously can't, they obviously not as agile as us where they can just pick it up and pass it across. They have to sort of shimmy it from one foot to the other without dropping it. And if they drop it and it rolls off, there's any number of predators waiting for that to happen. So it's done very, very carefully. So the small chicks like this one would sort of hatch in January. They're never left unattended. Both parents would share shifts to look after them. Perhaps one would be off fishing, but they'd always have an adult with them. And that's, again, there's so many predators there. A predator would have a chick that size like that. So they have to stay with their parent at all times. You can see that penguin there is actually going to its gland there to get a waterproof oil, which is just above the tail for preening. And then this is a much larger chick. So that last chick you saw is probably about 3 months old. This one is probably about 10 months old. So this has got another couple of months to go before it fledges. So during the winter time, which is sort of April to August, the young will be left on the land, the big ones like this, and they'll form a crash. So they'll get sort of 30 or 40 of these together. They'll all huddle in to keep warm, and all the parents will leave. The smaller chicks, always one parent stays with them. But unfortunately what happens with these is both parents leave and they go for a long period of time. They only come back very occasionally to feed them. So they actually drop 50% of their body weight during the winter. So then that's, again, why their breeding process is so complicated, because then the next spring, the parents have to feed them a lot to get them back up to that 100% level that they're going to fledge at. And then here's just 3 beautiful king penguins. Like, the color of these birds is just absolutely, like, stunning. Like, it's so almost, I don't know, just that deep, vivid orange that blends into that yellow, and it's just amazing to see. Now, these birds can dive up to about 800 feet when they're after their prey. So they're looking for, they like lanternfish, which are feeding very deep. They'll eat squid and other fish too, but particularly lanternfish. So they'll dive up to 800 feet looking for them. And because it's so deep, they have to be down a long time, so they're actually able to dive and hold their breath for about 23 minutes, which is pretty amazing. Now, because they're doing that in such cold water, they have to be extremely waterproof, and that doesn't come naturally to penguins as it doesn't with many birds, things like cormorants, for example. So penguins use an oil secretion from a gland just above the tail. So they'll get that oil and then have to rub it on all of their feathers, and they have to do this frequently to keep themselves waterproofed. And you can see the feathers of a penguin are like no other bird. They're completely different, very, very thick, dense, and short. So a closer look up of a king penguin there, and you can see that just how dense the feathers look. And penguins are said to have the densest feathers of any bird on the earth. It's sort of, I tried to do a bit of research into it. It said that they have about 30 feathers per square inch, but it was then hard to compare that to a similar bird of a similar size because most birds aren't waterproof. But basically, they have sort of 3 layers of feathers, an outer, a middle, and an inner, which works together to provide both waterproofing and thermal insulation. So it's like I've actually seen where they've cut like a dead penguin, they've cut through the wing to show, and it's like a thick rug. Like it's so incredibly dense. King penguin, by the way, it's the second biggest penguin in the world. The emperor penguin is slightly bigger, but these birds are about 3 foot tall. And then if we really have a real close look at one of those, again, you can see just how unique those feathers are. So penguin feathers are filled center, not a hollow one like a normal bird. So the extra fibers are for strength and withstanding the pressure of deep diving. So because they're going down up to 800 feet, those feathers have to be able to take that extreme pressure. So they're very different to other birds. Also, just standing, like you all know what it's like if you're out active and you're walking or running, you get warm. But actually just standing and sitting around, you get cold. So that dense feathering helps them in the Arctic temperatures as well. So the Gentoo penguin is the second biggest penguin which you get on the Falklands. And the Falklands has one of the largest breeding colonies, or actually the biggest breeding colony in the world for them. It's about 120,000 pairs of these guys. So these are quite distinctive with their orange feet and the white marking on the head there. And Gentoos are actually the fastest swimming of all the penguins. So they're actually able to clock up about 35, 36 miles an hour whilst they're swimming in the water. So when they come out of the water, they come zooming in and immediately like hit their feet on the beach and they're up and running in at speed. So they're really, really neat penguin to watch. Now, they're by far the tamest and most approachable of the penguins. And when I say approachable, you don't approach them, they come wandering up to you. So I've actually got a video of this actual photo, which I'll show at the end. But I was just sat there scoping out to sea. I was watching some dolphins and some seabirds flying by. These guys came in on the beach, sort of locked onto me, and then sort of came wandering across and would stop and then wander up a bit more and then stop. And then eventually they came within a few feet and they just sort of stood like looking at me. Which as a birder, when you're normally sort of creeping around, trying to get close to things and looking at them, it was kind of really bizarre to have a bird kind of doing exactly the same thing to you. So yeah, it's really cool experience to just sit there and have these penguins come wandering up looking at you like that. So Gentoo penguins use rocks to make a nest, and they're really funny little characters. They're constantly running around stealing rocks from each other, and literally like want to steal a rock, go back to its nest, put it down, and it will turn around to go back to take another one, and the nest next to it will come and take that rock. And they're just constantly stealing from each other. So they're really, really funny little characters to watch. They're one of the easiest penguins to see. They nest, when you arrive in the Falklands, they're pretty much right in town, on the beach right in town. But they will walk as far as sort of 5 kilometers inland to nest as well. And they have these sort of traditional routes, which the locals call penguin corridors or penguin highways, where it literally looks like a trodden down footpath, and it's just when tens of thousands of penguins over hundreds of years have walked that same trail to the colony. So it's really neat. So penguins, when they sleep, they completely lay down, and you can see this one here. That's it for the day. He's done his feeding, he's fed his youngsters, and then he's just going to chill out completely. And one day we were there, it started to drizzle. And then the wind picked up and they got covered in rain, and then it got even windier, and then the sand started blowing around, and all of these guys got completely covered in sand. And we were wandering around, and there was one, and I walked right up to it, And I said, oh, Dad, like, this is terrible. This one's died. And it was just led there on the sand, completely covered in sand. So I sort of pushed it with my foot, and it sort of stood up, and it like shook off, and it kind of gave me a look. It's like, what are you doing? And then it waddled a few feet and led back down. And obviously they're just used to this, like, you get such dramatic weather there that they just hunker down, and they just brave it out for a few hours, and then the weather goes, and then they're up and about again. And this is what the whole colony on the floor, it's just bright pink with their guano, and that's where they're feeding on krill. So that's what makes it pink. So the whole landscape on the floor is just bright pink or red. And then that's just a nice close-up of one of their heads there. So that's a Gentoo coming in, and then in the background there, we've got the next penguin species coming up. And if you look at the behavior, they both look a bit uneasy. And this is the most difficult part for a penguin, is coming ashore. So in the water, they can swim sort of 30 kilometers an hour. They're extremely maneuverable. On the land, they can walk around okay. They're not amazing at walking, but there's less predators. But at that stage, when they come into the shallow part, they're in huge amount of danger. So there's things like killer whales and sea lions, which are constantly trying to grab them at that point. So they come in, and they're very, very sort of nervous. They come in as quickly as they can. And so this is the one you could see in the background. This is a Magellanic penguin. So little black and white ones. And the local nickname for these is a jackass penguin, because they have a kind of mournful call, a bit like a donkey. So there's lots of local names for the birds there. But these guys are quite shy and timid, unlike the other penguins. These don't come wandering up to you. If you sort of try to approach these ones, unlike the other penguins, this species nests underground in burrows. So if you try and get too close, they'll just straight down the burrow. So here we can see we've got some adults which are molting into their winter plumage. So you can see that they're molting all those feathers out from last year, molting into nice brand new feathers that will keep them going all winter. And on the far right hand side, you can see one of this year's young, which is just about to fledge for its first winter. And then this is one of the adults which must still have not quite fully grown young in the nest chamber. So it's just sat in the entrance of the nest. But as I say, if you try and walk up to that, it's gone straight down inside. And then this is the photo my dad said, as long as I get a picture of me stood on a beach with loads of penguins behind, I'll be happy. So we got him his picture. And that's kind of sums up the scene nicely. Like, the penguins are just completely oblivious to you, which is just an absolute delight to be somewhere where nature doesn't run away from you and doesn't see you as a threat or something. Like, it's just such a pleasant experience. And then this is one of the predators on the beach. This is a striated caracara. The local nickname for this, they call them Johnny Rook. And these guys will be trying to take, these are one of the predators that if a king penguin's egg rolls when they're doing the switch over, these guys are going to swoop straight in and take the egg. They'll also quite happily eat the chunky bits of krill in the poo that I showed you, the red bits, or anything dead on the beach too. And then that goes the same for brown skewer. So I don't know if you're familiar with skewers, but Hamilton's very good for Jaegers in the fall. In the UK, all Jaegers are called skewers. And we have a skewer like this called a great skewer. There's lots of species of skewer that all look very, very similar to this. But this one used to be called the Falkland Islands skewer, but they've recently drew that back, and it's in the brown skewer complex, this one now. But this is another pirate of the sea. This is a sort of bird that would chase another bird, pull its tail, and just keep pulling its tail until it regurgitated its food, and then it would drop down, eat the food, and go off. Or it would try and kill a baby penguin, or eat other dead stuff like that. So this is another constant predator patrolling the beaches. And then this is one of only 2 endemic species of bird on the Falkland Island. This is the Falkland Island steamer duck. And this is actually a flightless bird, so they're incapable of flying. So you've got the male on the right with the nice orange beak and the female on the left with the yellow beak. Now it's a bit easier to see in this picture, but flightless birds kind of look like a bird in wing molt. So if you look at the primaries, so if you look at that white patch and then that group of long feathers, on a normal bird that would be lower down, further back and kind of extending towards the tail. So that shows you that the wings are incredibly short. The other thing, if you look at the breast, it's sort of saggy and it's showing you that they're not as fit as a flight bird. You know, they don't have the abs of a bird that's flying around. However, you can get anywhere near them. If you try and approach them, they run and they use their wings, they almost hit the floor of them, and you can see they've got bare knuckles where they do that. So they kind of use them a bit like maybe if you've seen chickens can do a similar sort of thing. So they still use the wings and they can dive with them, but they can't fly. So some of the other birds that we encountered when we were on the island there, this is a kind of neat one, white bridled finch, quite a large finch, quite an attractive bird that really you wouldn't expect to see on this far-flung, rugged island nearly in Antarctica. And then that was pretty much it for the island there. That's the team. That's where we stayed in the background. We took one sort of last look at the penguins, and then it was time for us to head back on the aircraft and back to the mainland. Now, it's another super cool flight, not very high, like really cool looks at everything. And that's coming into the main city there. So that's the only town in the islands, that's Stanley. And then just looking around the town, if you've been to the UK, it's just like a little UK in the Antarctic. So you've got the same phone boxes, exactly the same mail. Obviously the churches in England don't tend to have jawbones of whales outside, but you know, it's pretty similar. And then there's 1 or 2 of the Land Rovers, which are everywhere around town. And then most people tend to have like a cetacean in the garden, or, you know, just a dead whale in the garden or something like that. So wandering around the town, you can still find some pretty neat birds. These used to be called Patagonian crested duck, but I believe they're just called crested duck these days. But this is quite a big duck. And these were just floating around in the harbors right downtown. I should say that was my bit of the trip done now. So the deal was we would go to this island, I'd get my fix of birds, and then the second half of the trip was kind of history, and then the rest of the team wanted to go around looking at the military graveyards and things like that. However, I managed to find birds everywhere we went. So this isn't the birding bit. But this is a dark-faced ground tyrant. So this is a terrestrial flycatcher resident to the Falkland Islands. And although you can see this on the mainland, this is a potential split in the future. This one's a lot bigger than the mainland version. So it's actually kind of neat to see these little flycatchers there. And then this is the second half of the trip. So the guys were really interested in the history of the Falklands War, and they wanted to visit the graveyards. And this was actually the scene in that bay of one of the British warships was hit by several missiles from Argentinian aircraft and was actually sunk. So quite a few British soldiers lost their life in that bay. So that one was there to commemorate that. And driving around the Falklands, it's predominantly like this. It's like if you've been to Scotland or Ireland, it's predominantly moorland. So it's just this huge landscape. And if you ever do any research on the war, that the British actually dropped the troops on one side of the island at night, and they were supposed to walk right across the island to fight on the other side. And it's actually worth looking into. It was like an amazing thing that the troops managed to get across this very rugged terrain as they did, and then into the many heavy battles that took place there. But as you're driving along, you come across these flocks of geese everywhere, and these are upland geese. So a closer look at them. They're really beautiful geese. So the females have this sort of rich burgundy and these almost like tiger stripe markings. and then the males are the white ones there. And then there's a look at them in flight too, because they're really neat in flight. So this is a grave of one of the Harrier jump jets. So one of the British pilots was shot down here. So that's his gravestone there. But it just sort of shows you again how rugged the island is. You can see how strong the wind is. That there's very few trees. They don't grow very high, and they all get bent over like that. So it's a very sort of hostile environment for anything to live in. And then I put this one in mainly because there's a crested caracara in Ontario at the moment, in northern Ontario, which is very rare for here. How many people have seen that one? Oh, look at all the twitchers in the back. 4, 5 of you. How many hours drive is that? 12? What?
Only 8.
Only 8 each way? You can't say each. That's 16, isn't it? Okay, so obviously I went a lot further to see one. But it's kind of neat to see the crested caracara has a huge range. So they occur right across South America and the Caribbean and into some of the states as well. But yeah, there is one in northern Ontario at the moment. But I just thought that was neat that they go all the way down to almost Antarctica. The sort of island is littered with signs of the war. This is an Argentinian helicopter that got downed. But just around the corner from this was a pond covered in ducks. So we had to stop for a quick look at that too. And there's actually some really beautiful wildfowl, which I don't think most people would expect to be down on these islands. But you've got some chillo widgeon there, which are the ones with the green heads and the white fronts to the face, and then the yellow-billed teal there. So really beautiful wildfowl. And then here's another one. This is silver teal. So again, you could see these in some places in South America, but to sort of see them on this rock in Antarctic waters was pretty cool. And then this is a really beautiful grebe. This is one or two different species of grebe that they have there. This is white tufted grebe. Really quite a striking bird with this absolutely like vivid bright red eye and the world's smallest tail. And then everywhere we went on the island, we had these guys, and these are giant petrels. So these are just slightly smaller than the albatrosses, but very, very similar. They have a huge wingspan, and these are another predator. So they're flying around the islands constantly. But unlike the albatross, they come inland. So they come across fields, and they're flying exactly the same way. They're doing that dynamic soaring, but they're doing it over land. So it's just really bizarre to see this huge seabird just suddenly come sweeping in and soaring up over the top of a sheep in a field. And it's kind of looking down, just to see if the sheep's good. Because if there's a sheep lying down, they're down on it. Like these are like the sort of vultures of the south. And then there's a few different types of cormorant down there. This is a Magellanic cormorant. So this is a really pretty little cormorant with white belly and bright red around the eye there. The two black ones are birds of the year, so they're juveniles. And then the local bird of prey. So this is a type of butios. This is kind of like their equivalent to the red-tailed hawk. So this is a variable hawk. It's called variable hawk because it comes in a variety of different plumage colors. Ranging from very pale grey to very, very dark burgundy like this individual here. And then they have their own thrush, so just like an American robin, but an austral thrush. And they have their own type of pipit, the coriander pipit. So sort of one thrush and one pipit eking out an existence on this rock. And then they also have their own siskin and their own meadowlark too. So their meadowlark, unlike the ones you're familiar with here, which would be yellow, is bright red. And then the black-chinned siskin there, which is really bizarre to see these siskins. As I said, there's hardly any trees whatsoever. And then a final day, the rest of the family were going off to see more war memorials around the island. And I asked, could they drop me at the headland first thing? And I wanted to do a bit of sea watching. So they agreed and they dropped me at the lighthouse. and it's known to be one of the best sort of observation points to look at seabirds on the island. So they dropped me there, and I spent 4 or 5 hours sat, and you can see this little concrete pillar, I think, was built by the local birders. So they sit there, it keeps you out of the wind. And then I just stared out of the ocean there with my tally counter clicking away at the seabirds. So this is what I managed to clock up. Only 27 species, but just big numbers of birds. So there's about 3,500 albatross. Managed to get a southern royal albatross and 2 snowy albatrosses. So snowy albatross is actually the biggest albatross in the world. So it absolutely dwarfs the black-browed albatross. Like, so I'm watching these black-browed albatross like shearing up, and then like this absolute giant just comes up, and I'm sort of yelling to everyone else, you know, like snowy albatross, and I'm the only one sat there. That's not strictly true. There was actually a large sea lion laying just below me, but not interested at all. But yeah, snowy albatross, if you look that one up, that is kind of like the albatross. That was like the icing on the cake for me to see that shearing along. And then just huge numbers. So sooty shearwater nest there. I saw about 7,000 of them there, but I think there's several 100,000 nests there. And they're actually really neat because they breed down in the Falklands, but then they tour the entire planet before coming back to breed there. So they'll actually go via Australia, and then in the fall they're back around Alaska, coming down California, and then back. So they literally do the whole globe when they're not nesting. So yeah, some other cool birds there. Obviously, I saw quite a few birds that I didn't necessarily show you in this talk. And then this is just to show you how lovely the Falklands is. This is really beautiful. And after I'd done my sea watch, they said, did they want me to pick them up? I said, no, it's fine, I'll walk back. And I walked back, and I was going to walk along that beach on the right, but I got to a sign, and it said that possible landmines still in the area. And I was like, oh, that's really annoying, because I wanted to go back that way. So I didn't. And then I found out that, I don't know if you can see those dots in the middle, but that was my dad. So they had gone in that way anyway, and they were there, and then they showed me these pictures. There was hundreds of penguins on that beach, which they showed me these glorious pictures. So I kind of wish I'd given it a shot now, but I guess it was probably a sensible thing to do. Anyway, it was a fantastic trip. You know, for me, everything worked out. Like, the weather played a good part in it. All the sort of logistics, the flight and everything, we were really lucky that everything just came together. It was a sort of dream come true to see penguins and albatrosses. And obviously, my father lives in the UK, so any excuse to hang out with my dad is always something that I want to jump on at any point. But the sort of memories we made on that trip, going down there and seeing that stuff together, that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it today. It's just such a great trip. Obviously, when I'm tour leading, you know, I'm very worky, and I don't choose who comes with me, and we travel around, and they can be great trips, but you know, this was just such a special trip. So I hope that you could share a little bit with me tonight, and I really hope some of you might make it there, because it's such a special place. And have we got time for any videos or not?
Maybe we can do that as I hand you this, and
thank you.
thank you for presenting
Yeah,
for
you're
us.
very welcome.
So if any of you have to head out, then maybe this is the time you sneak out, and I'll set up the videos here. They're very short, so we can see them. I believe I put them here.
Yeah, so I'm wearing the t-shirt.
Oh, okay. So this
Yeah.
video here.
So this is the little flight to the island. No hands on the wheel there, you see that?
All right, let's go to the
Yeah, my dad wanted me to put a slide in with the beer. Anyone a parent here? We all give in the end. So this is taken with my cell phone, where I was just sat. They're just walking up to me. And that's a brown skewer just flying in the background. I was preparing to run at this point. This is just to show you how windy it got, what sort of weather they have to withstand. You can see a bird incubating in the background there, an egg too. Again, anyone else a parent? Yeah. Yeah, so the parents really do take the brunt of the storm. You know, the chicks will hide right behind them. The parents take all of the wind. And then if they're small enough, they'll get right underneath. But when they're that big, they just stand around the other side. So really neat birds.
Yeah, thank you again for this presentation. If anybody has questions for James, perhaps they can reach you by email or
Yeah, for
come
sure.
get your card or email address or something from you.
Okay.
And let's see, can I hit this? Just to say, oh, did it go to the, oh, I went all the way to the start. Come on, go to the end. There we go. All right, and just a reminder, next month we have a presenter on nuts and bolts. So that'll be really fun. But otherwise, we will see you in December. Thank you all for coming out. Now, we don't have a lot of time left in the building, so thank you. If you have any questions of James, come up and maybe get an email address from him, etc. So thank you.
Did you get your second then, Devitt?